The tracks in the photograph were hers, and her rover had never been within 4 kilometers of that ridge. Vera Lund had the frame open at 0340 on a Tuesday, alone in the planning room, and she could read tracks the way other people read handwriting. 2 parallel lines in bright dust, the gap between them exactly the width of Arden's chassis. And pressed into the soil, over and over, the little dashes and dots the wheel cleats stamped as they turned. The mission's own name in Morse code printed all the way out to the horizon. Ardent had made those marks. Ardent had never been there. Both of those things were true. She was 31 hours into a shift that should have ended at 10, and she was the wrong person to find this. Vera was the mission's designated skeptic. 4 years of anomalies had crossed her desk, a bright object that became a lens flare, a straight-edged shadow that became a rock, and she had killed every one of them, politely, in writing. She had a transfer request open on the other screen. 2 weeks, and she would be off Mars entirely, working on something with a launch date and a future. She looked at the tracks and felt 2 things at once, and only one of them was fear. The first explanation was the boring one, and she reached for it like a handrail. Rovers do not know where they are. Mars has no satellite navigation and no magnetic field, so there is nothing for a compass to point at. Position is a running guess. Wheel turns, an inertial unit, the angle of the sun, the way rocks slide across the frame as you move. Every one of those lies a little. Over a long traverse, the guess drifts. Ardent could genuinely be standing somewhere its own map insisted it had never been. For about 40 minutes, sitting in the dark with cold coffee, Vera believed that. It was almost a relief. Then she did the arithmetic, because that was the part of herself she could never switch off. Drift is tens of meters, sometimes 100. It is not 4 kilometers, and it does not accumulate sideways across a ridge the rover had never climbed. And there was a harder check, the one the planners ran every week. Match the surface panorama to the pictures from orbit. Line up the boulders, the crater rim, the pale scar of the ancient channel. Ardent's position was correct to within 9 meters. The rover knew exactly where it was. It simply had not been where its own footprints were. She started a list of explanations and was already down to 4. Explanation 2 was Mars itself. The planet manufactures straight dark lines without any help. Dust devils that scour parallel scars for kilometers. Dry avalanches that streak down slopes. Ridges of wind-piled sand that photograph like roads. Half the artificial structures ever reported on Mars had dissolved into ordinary weather at higher resolution. Explanation 3 was hardware. A discarded heat shield, a spent parachute, the burn scar of an older mission's descent stage. Both died on geometry. The spacing between the lines was Ardent's wheelbase, to the centimeter. The imprint was Ardent's cleat pattern. Nothing on Mars stamps Morse code into dust by accident. 2 down. Then she magnified the tread. Ardent's wheels were ruined. Everyone on the mission knew it. There were photographs. 3 years of sharp, wind-carved rock had punched holes through the thin aluminium and snapped 4 cleats clean off. And every track the rover had laid since carried that damage like a signature inside a signature, a stutter in the pattern where the missing teeth should have bitten. The tracks on the ridge had no stutter. The pattern was whole, unworn, perfect in a way Ardent had not been since its first year on the planet. Vera sat very still for a long time. Whatever had gone out over that rise was wearing her rover's feet from before they broke. She should have gone home. Instead, she filed for an orbital pass, and that was the moment she stopped being the mission's skeptic, though she would not admit it for another week. The orbiter came over 4 sols later and photographed the ridge at 30 centimeters a pixel. The tracks were there. Not an artifact of the rover's camera, not compression, not a trick of low sun. 2 dark lines, visible from 300 kilometers up. Exactly where Ardent's frame said they were. Every check she had ever built to make an anomaly disappear had instead confirmed this one. She had spent 4 years killing ghosts, and this ghost kept passing its own autopsy. The last check was the one that changed the shape of the thing. Tracks on Mars fade. There is no rain and no water, but there is dust, drifting down and settling, softening every disturbed edge over months, over a year or 2 at most. Age a track by its contrast, and you have a clock. Vera measured the contrast, ran it twice, then a 3rd time because her hands had gone unsteady. The tracks were sharp, not months old, days at most, and they led away from the ridge, not toward it. outbound, into ground, nobody had ever imaged. Something had made them while the mission was watching, and nobody had seen a thing. That was because nobody watches the whole Sol. This is the part people outside the mission never believe. The cameras sleep. Power is rationed. Imaging is scheduled hours in advance from 160 million kilometers away. And for most of every Martian day, the rover simply sits with its eyes shut. There were 9 hours a Sol when Mars went entirely unobserved. Vera wrote a sequence to spend them. Night frames, the full arc of the horizon, every 90 minutes until dawn. Power the mission could not spare. On a hunch she could not justify, signed with her own name. She closed the transfer request without reading it again. The uplink went at dawn her time. Then she waited because there is no other option. The plan runs on its own, the relay satellite passes when it passes, and the answer sits inside a machine on another world for 11 hours before it begins the long fall home. It came down at 21:04. Vera opened the frames in order. Nothing moved in them. No shape, no light, no figure crossing the ridge. Only the same cold ground under the same hard stars. But the tracks were longer. 60 meters longer than they had been at sunset, running on into the dark, and the new stretch was shallower. Whatever made them was getting lighter. She published everything. Raw frames, product identifiers, the fade measurement, the orbital pass, and her own failed explanations listed in order with the reason each one died. That was the strangest part, in the end. No secrecy, no buried file, nothing withheld. Anyone can pull the images. Nobody can explain them. Vera Lund is still on the mission. She wrote one line into the standing sequence, and it runs at the close of every drive. Look back. So Ardent drives, and stops, and turns its cameras on its own trail, Sol after Sol, checking the dust behind it. None of this happened. The engineering is real. The only open question is what the rover is checking for, whether something is following its tracks or laying them out ahead.